Hi, it's Tim Hagen from Progress Coaching, and welcome to another episode of Coaching Conversations. And I wanted to make you aware of something very cool that we're doing on a subscription basis, and we'll put a link in each one of our episodes. But every Wednesday, we're going to be doing what we call an audio podcast workshop. That workshop will be roughly about 14 to maybe 20 minutes per episode, with each month having a theme from a coaching model, using feedback strategically, to coaching self-awareness, and so on. So if you could look in the body or in the content description of each episode, and you will see a link where you can join this subscription. These are literally 4 workshops every month teaching specific strategies to address a particular area of workplace coaching as it relates, again, to things like awareness, motivation, teamwork, and what have you. Here's the cool thing. It's only $10 per month, and each month you will get a handout that we will follow along with. So we also give you a tool for you to take notes as we go through each episode. We hope you'll check it out.
Hi, everybody. It's Tim Hagen from Coaching Conversations. And today we have a subject matter expert in the sales arena, Mike Carroll, who has written a book, The Sales Team That You Deserve. And today we're going to really focus a lot about sales coaching, and how the sales industry has certainly evolved over the last 2 years. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well, Tim. And you?
Good. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the book, if you would like to, and a little bit about what you're seeing currently in the sales industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to a great conversation. So Mike Carroll with Intelligent Conversations. I help companies build high-achieving sales organizations using data and science and a proven coaching cadence to elevate performance. So started my company in 2004, have been focusing on primarily middle market B2B sales organizations and really working on transforming sales organizations. We see a lot of common challenges and struggles. And, I decided to capture all of that knowledge and experience and really practical advice in my book. So I wrote The Sales Team You Deserve, mainly for CEOs who I see struggling with inaccurate forecasts and, just not knowing what to do to elevate their performance. And so in that book, what I've tried to do is share an entire roadmap for what a company can do to get the sales team they truly deserve.
Well, and it's interesting. I love the title of the book, by the way. And when you and I've known each other for a long time, what I've always found funny about the sales industry is for the last 30, 40 years, we've had the same statistic. Roughly 1 out of 2 salespeople don't hit their quotas.
Right.
So why can't CEOs or sales leaders solve this?
I think where you stand influences where you sit, right? And what I mean by that is CEOs are influenced by whatever they did before they became CEOs. So we look at the role they were in before. If you came from an operational background, for example, your approach to sales is influenced and instructed by that. So you think in terms of logical workflow, and it's going to go from here to there. The problem with a sale is you're not producing a widget. You're not producing something that's tangible. It goes from an intangible state, like a decision hasn't been made, to all of a sudden a decision's made. It's not just putting more material in one end of the pipeline and expecting the same, products to come out the other end. If you come from a marketing background, you're going to be more focused on features and functions and great presentations, but that doesn't necessarily translate to sales. If you have, say, maybe a legal background or a finance background, you tend to look for avoiding risk, or you tend to look at cost. You look at your sales organization as an expense rather than as an investment. And so one of the blind spots that we see CEOs have is they're not able to separate their role and understand the impact they have on the sales organization. A couple real practical things that CEOs can do immediately as soon as they listen to this. Number one, understand the power of the 3 little letters after your name. You can pick up the phone and help move things forward for your sales team. Now, a lot of CEOs freak out about that. Think, oh my God, there's a reason why I hired these guys. But that title, give you a scenario. I had a client who they lost a big deal they were expecting, and they came in second, which doesn't pay as well as first, as you know, right? So, and the CEO was really frustrated. I said, well, why don't you call the other CEO and just ask for feedback? He's like, what do you mean? And so I had to actually practice with him and role play and get him comfortable with it. He called, the guy answered on the second ring, happy to have a debrief, said, look, we really liked your sales guy. We really liked your product. It just was these couple of factors. And they formed a relationship. And I also coached that CEO. I said, hey, ask him what success looks like 6 months from now and set a covenant with that other CEO and say, hey, if you're not getting it, will you give us a second chance? Sure enough, 4 months later, that CEO is calling him saying, you know what? I'm not thinking this is going to work. Let's get your guy back in here. That conversation never would have happened had that CEO not picked up the phone and had that conversation CEO to CEO. And of course, the salesperson calls and says, oh, can I get feedback? And they hear all the generic, oh, your price was good, but just
Right.
missing a couple features. And they don't really have that meaningful conversation.
Yeah, and it's cool because a CEO doing that today also creates more transparency with the sales team and the sales leaders, because a
Well,
lot of times what do is they look down and look at the numbers primarily.
yeah, they're
Speak
they're like looking at the forecast, going, "Why isn't this happening?" The
right.
amount of motivation and inspiration that came from just that one transaction,
Sure.
unbelievable.
Yeah, totally. So when you think about success in setting goals, where does that come into play right now with sales teams and certainly sales reps, but also sales leaders? How has that go? How has that evolved over the last couple of years with the pandemic?
It's interesting. So I think it's so crucial for sales managers to really understand the personal why of everyone on their team, not only from a motivation perspective, but also from an accountability perspective. And nobody does it, right? It's not that hard. There's a million goals programs out there. We always ask our sales leaders that are in our coaching program to do a goals exercise for themselves and then to lead their team through it. It's a transformational conversation. It may be that one person's why is they want to pay for their daughter's private high school, or somebody else's why is they want to make sure that their aging parents have the quality of life they deserve, or maybe they want a bass boat, or maybe they have philanthropic goals, or maybe they want to leave a legacy, a door at the Memorial Union at the University of Wisconsin, whatever it is,
Yeah.
whatever motivates them. When a manager can help the salesperson see their company as the means through which they'll achieve that goal, that's where motivation happens. And oh, by the way, it's a lot easier to hold somebody accountable to their goal than to the company goal of increasing EBITDA by X percent,
Right.
which it doesn't really do anything for them. But when you say, look, I'm worried about you, you said you wanted to coach your son's little league team. And in order to do that, you have to be ahead of quota. And I don't see it happening. What do we need to change in the next month and a half so that when April comes and baseball practice starts, you can comfortably leave the office at 4 p.m. without worrying about your numbers? When you have that kind of
Right.
conversation, that personal goal becomes much more meaningful and creates that culture of accountability.
Well, and it's funny because I actually have a friend who is a sales leader, and he wanted me to talk to one of his reps who was twice his age. And I talked to the rep who there was a demographic issue. And after about 4 or 5 good questions, found out his goal is to send his 3 boys through college with no debt.
Right.
That was his
Right.
lifelong goal. Whereas the sales manager said, well, it's all about money, which tends to be that assumptive from the sales. It's all about money. But you get
Right.
into that whiff of what's in it for them with the money or even outside the money, it really changes things.
I would say most companies listening to this, most people listening to this, they probably have very detailed annual business plans, quarterly business plans, monthly plans, and the KPIs and the OKRs and all of that, every other 3-letter acronym to dial that in. And you need to track that. Don't get me wrong, but again, having that personal conversation, that connection that a manager can make, it really creates a healthy coaching relationship with
Yeah.
each individual on their team.
Yeah, it's always funny because when we talk to leaders, we always say, don't try to motivate until you first understand what motivates. And it's
Correct.
such a simple thing, but boy, when you find out, like what you had, the example that you alluded to, it really changes things.
Right.
Speaking of which, how do you create an environment for sales success, especially today with what you just talked about with goals and just some of the challenges that are going on today?
When I think of the sales environment, and I wrote about this, and there's a whole chapter on this in my book, I'm really thinking about the amount of money that companies spend on sales enablement and their tech stack, and the amount of wasted money companies spend on CRM systems that don't work, or on marketing automation programs that are ill-conceived, or even things like getting your compensation plan. The thing right now that I see that's really trending in the market is you've got to take a look at your comp plan. It's a tough recruiting environment. It's hard to find great sales talent. And you can't expect to pay, 40K, 50K base and say, oh, look at your on-target earnings are going to be 200,000 3 years from now when you're selling $7 million. That's not going to work. You've got to protect their downside risk. if you're asking the people you want to hire are probably already working somewhere, probably already have it figured out. They've already got a full pipeline. They've got deals coming in. They've got a high base. You've got to, entice them to want to take that risk and protect their downside. Now, if you have the right hiring system and you're bringing people on the right way, it gets a lot easier to do that. And, but I had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with a CEO who's used to paying, 50 grand. That's the most he'll pay. I'm like,
Right.
you're not going to get anyone.
Right.
And for that level of difficulty, it's like, you really need to be at 90 grand, and maybe you lower your commission a little bit. Maybe you do a draw. There's different ways you can do that. But if you're hiring high performers and you're coaching them as you bring them on board, that's one of the things we're seeing. We could do a whole podcast on how screwed up CRMs are. I mean, I have
Right.
strong opinions about that, but that's a topic that's been well discussed. I think marketing automation, there's so many scattered, you're very good on LinkedIn, you're very good at outreach. Not everyone is. And yet I see a lot of companies dropping money and marketing departments spending time trying to set salespeople up for success. And the sales team pretty much ignores the marketing team. And
Right.
it's a problem.
Right. So thinking about all that, where does sales leadership come into play? What are some of the things you're seeing that they're doing well and potentially challenged by?
So a couple of thoughts there. One is sales managers who were high-performing salespeople, right? A lot of CEOs are like, oh, he's our best performer. Let's make him the manager. Let's make her the manager. And it's one of the worst things you can do, right?
Yep.
I think high-performing salespeople who walk through the portal called sales manager, they forget everything that made them successful as a salesperson. What makes you successful as a salesperson? Asking great questions. Right. And you lead a customer through a conversation they haven't had before, and you get them to think of their business or their problem or whatever it is you're talking about differently. All of a sudden you become a manager and you stop asking questions. You just start telling people what to do.
Right.
It's this continuum. You've got on one end of the spectrum, you've got coaching for development. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have coaching for production. Coaching for production is basically telling people what to do. And so when a high performing sales manager comes in, they just start doing that. Well, what I would do, and here's what you should do, and they start giving them the script. High-performing salespeople don't want to be told what to do. They're not going to stay there and just listen to their manager tell them exactly what to do. Instead, you got to go to the other end of the spectrum and start asking questions that get them to think on their own, and use the skills that got you to be successful as a salesperson and sell, quote unquote, sell your team on the ideas you want to advocate. When you lead them through a conversation that gets them to that right conclusion on their own, they own the idea rather than you telling them, oh, I knew that was going to work. I just did what Tim said. Well, of course.
Right.
So, having the right kind of coaching conversations, coaching for development, not coaching for production. And, a lot of coaching conversations, we find, here's a nerd stat for you. Only 7% of sales managers are effective at sales coaching. I mean, we're horrible at it. Most coaching conversations are pipeline reviews.
Yeah.
And it's not even a full pipeline review. It's like, what's going to close this week? What's going to close this month? Depends on your sales cycle. How can I help you get that across the line? And that poor manager is getting squeezed because their boss is asking the CEO or the VP of sales are like, when's this going to close? I got to update my forecast. So all the focus is on the bottom of the funnel instead of looking at the entire sales process and looking at that individual salesperson saying, what are the 2 or 3 things they need to work on to elevate their performance and, focus on the mid to long-term development, not just the short-term production.
Well, don't you think that also comes back from sales leadership at the director VP level, also putting the pressure on the numbers downward? Because a lot of times sales managers, when they first become managers, they know they got to be successful with the numbers because that's what they're used to. So they gravitate to that. Here's what you need to do versus asking those questions.
Yeah, and I see managers who are almost like super salespeople. What I mean by that is they get their team to get deals right to the finish line, and then they swoop in and they close. And it's immediate feedback. It's immediate dopamine hit, right? I look at me, I'm coming in, I'm closing. They get sized for a cape and they fly in and they close those deals, right? It's so demotivating to a salesperson to have that happen. And they think, why am I working so hard? And, rather than doing that, we coach managers to say, hey, get your team there so they can go do it on their own.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot that managers can do. I think that, again, back to the goals and back to understanding what makes people tick and, being able to push back to your manager and say, hey, look, we're going to get these numbers down, but we're going to also get better as an organization incrementally. One of the measures I use to measure the effectiveness of coaching conversations is if the quality of the problems your team brings to you improves over time, your coaching is good, right? If you're getting the same problem every time, oh, I'm stuck on this budget objection, or I'm stuck on this, competitor or whatever, maybe your coaching isn't that good. So look at, over time, the quality of the problems your team brings to you should improve. And the other thing I would say is managers have to be patient, and you'll hear a lot of things you could coach. Be laser focused, pick one or two areas to focus on, and focus on that over the course of an entire quarter. 13 weeks in a quarter, if you're doing a weekly coaching cadence, which is what we recommend, or even a bi-weekly, right? You're going to have 6 to 12 coaching conversations in a 13-week quarter. Those are 13 opportunities or 12 opportunities to focus on rapport building or discovery questions or qualifying the budget. You may hear other things you want to coach them on, just take note of it. But if you start picking at every little thing that they could improve, it's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for you. They don't know what you're going to ask. So pick a couple of areas to focus and stick with it over the course of 3 to 6 months and watch your team grow, watch them improve.
Well, and it's interesting because when you think about, I love the way you said that about, picking up on the things that they are doing wrong, and you start to hit 5, 6, 7, 8 topics. We have to be honest as human beings. That's tough not only to hear, yet to assimilate and then put it into practice. It's like a golf swing.
I don't even know what to do next. Right.
Yeah. A good golf coach doesn't cover every component of a golf swing. It's just too much to assimilate versus they'll break down the swing by component, which kind of leads to our next topic of sales skill sets. The last 2 to 3 years, things have really changed the way we sell, how we present ourselves, showing up on camera. I mean, all those things. What are some of the trends that are going on right now as you see it to developing skill sets in the workplace?
One of the things that we do, I think, better than a lot of sales coaching organizations is we take a data-driven approach, right? And so we want to understand selling skills and also sales DNA competency. So first thing we do when we work with a sales organization is we do a deep dive analysis. We call it a sales effectiveness and improvement analysis. And that helps us understand, there's like 300 different data sets, but we roll it into 21 core competencies. So there's skill sets and then there's mindsets, right? And so skill sets are all the things you'd expect: hunting, closing, qualifying, consultative selling, presentation skills, relationship building, all of that good stuff. One of the skill sets, by the way, we added when COVID hit is we added a video selling skill set, right? Because it's different. If you're used to pulling up onto the job site in your pickup truck and looking at the blueprints on the hood of your, Ford F-150 and saying, how many of these switches do you need or whatever? Now I've got to do that on camera, and I'm not even comfortable logging in. That's a very different skill set. So that's one of the skill sets we added. There's a lot of training available for the typical selling skill sets. There's a reason why training doesn't work, though. You've probably invested in training and think, why is this not working? I sent them to the webinar, they went to the seminar. What happened? There's a whole set of mindset issues. And we've talked about this before, Tim. This is like, need for approval or comfort discussing money and things like that. If you understand the underlying beliefs that either help and support or hinder your ability to execute a sales tactic, that's where the coaching gets better. That's where you can work on the individual mindset. So one of the things we like to do is we have individual learning tracks so that everybody on your team gets a program tailored to them. So they understand, hey, if I have high need for approval, it's more important for me to be liked by the customer than to get the business. In some ways, that's a strength, right? So we want to build on that. In other ways, it's holding you back. And so you have to kind of reframe that and think of it differently. And so that's in the book, we talk about the skill sets and mindsets that impact sales. A lot of that goes back to that sales evaluation and understanding what makes each person on your team tick. It informs the coaching conversations and it elevates their performance. When you start to unblock their limited mindsets, their skill sets will improve as well.
Do you feel like the organization, specifically the sales leaders, will focus more on skill sets?
Typically, that's where the immediate feedback is. And typically what happens is we're going to do a prospecting workshop. We're going to, at the next sales meeting, come with your objections, and they work on it. And everybody can do it in role play. Everyone can kind of fill out the right answers or whiteboard or whatever, depending on what you're doing. and it sounds great in the safety of the conference room or the Zoom call, right? But when live bullets are flying, when they're out in front of real prospects and they get an objection and their need for approval kicks in, they're not going to be able to address that, right? And so you have to do the exercise in the sales meeting or in the workshop. That's great, but you also, to really let it stick, you've got to help them understand, hey, these mindsets are holding you back, and here's what you need to do to reframe that and approach it from a different perspective.
So how do you use that leading into our last topic? How do you use that for sales hiring? We all know about the talent shortage.
Right.
We have a number of companies that work, have in the sales arena. It's amazing to me as an outsider how many people just leave from job to job because they get a signing bonus or what have you, and they attribute it to their leader isn't engaged, and you find out they're not hitting their numbers, whether right or wrong. How do people now hire and really get the right people? Because that has always been one of the biggest hindrances in the sales industry. What do you guys do to help clients do that?
So a couple of things. One, we leverage the data that we have through the evaluation tools that we use. So that's key. That helps you set a benchmark and raise the expectation for who you even let into the interview process, right? And so that's number one. Where you source matters, right? A lot of companies will kind of just hire anyone that has a heartbeat and can talk in complete sentences. Here's the thing: mediocre salespeople can run circles around a great HR person in an interview. Salespeople sell. They're really good at presenting themselves. They're really good at negotiating their salary bump, right? And then you get them out in the field and they hang around for 6 or 9 months. And then you're like, man, the only thing they sold me is an increase in their base salary. That's it, right? And so that's things like, so you've got to be intentional about where you source. We help companies write ads differently. Go on Indeed, go on LinkedIn, look at the ad job board. And most sales ads are deadly. They're boring. It's like, it's almost like a job scorecard just put up on Indeed. It's like, oh, here are your duties and responsibilities. I want to tell the story. I want to describe must have prior success selling X to this kind of audience. You should have these attributes and skills, knowledge of this, experience with that. Be specific. Describe what you're looking for in your ideal salesperson in the ad. You're going to stand out in the sea of mediocrity of all the other boring ads out there. Most ads are all about the company and how great they are and what the job requirements are. Instead, make it about a description of the kind of person you're looking for. Then we pull that forward. We actually, we go through a whole process. We screen them using our online assessment. If they get past that, we'll do a very intense 6-minute challenge phone interview. And I'll tell people, listen, I've read your resume. I don't need you to read it to me. I want you to sell with stories. Tell me the story of your career. So let me describe what I'm looking for. And then I pull out the ad and I read a couple of sentences, must have prior success doing X, Y, Z. Tell me how that's you. And I want to see, can they bring life to their resume and then tell me that story effectively?
And adjust.
Yeah. And think on their feet and think under pressure. I'm not rude or obnoxious, but I'm not warm and friendly either. I want to, I want to simulate a sales call and find out how good are you at thinking on your feet and adjusting. I'll hit prospecting habits. I'll hit closing. Right about the time 6 to 8 minutes into the call when they're getting comfortable, I pull the rug out from under them and I say, hey, listen, here's how I'm going to end the call. And I do a hard stop. And I want to see if they try and keep me on for another minute or try and ask me a qualifying question. Most just kind of whimper away and go away and that's it. I want to hear them ask a follow-up question.
Well, and that goes a little bit to their mindset.
Absolutely.
Into their comfort. So tell our audience a little bit about your hiring system, because that's one of the things that your company does that I think is so unique. Tell our audience about that hiring system that you and I have conversed about.
Yeah, so we have something we call our sales talent acquisition routine. We're not the best, most creative people, Tim, but we call it the STAR hiring system. I know it's like watching paint dry, but that's what I'm describing is that STAR hiring system. So it starts with really good clarity on what you're looking for in the role. This is where most companies get it wrong. They're not very clear. They're like, oh, we need the person to cover this territory. They don't think clearly about, exactly what they want that person to do, the level of competition they're going to face, how much resistance they're going to get from customers and prospects. All of those, there's a bunch of factors that you have to dial in to really be specific and intentional. If you don't get clarity on what you're looking for, anyone will do.
Yeah.
So now your CFO says, oh, I've got my cousin's nephew's son-in-law who says he can sell. You should bring him in. And if you haven't defined the role, it's like, well, sure, bring him in. Why not? And then you make a hiring mistake. Sales hiring mistakes are probably, they say any hiring mistake is 2x salary. I would say sales is maybe 4x their salary because there's an opportunity cost. If they're burning opportunity in your market, it makes it harder for the next person that you put in that role.
Well, and that even extends beyond the opportunity, it becomes part of the brand.
Yeah, you damage your brand and you damage your talent brand. If you're always cycling through salespeople, believe me, salespeople talk like, oh, don't go work at XYZ. They're not going to, I was there for a month. It was terrible.
Right. So tell our audience, how do we get a hold of you? How do people engage with your company? How do they get more information on your company?
Well, thank you, Tim. So our website is intelligentconversations.com. If you go to intelligentconversations.com/tools, we've got a bunch of white papers and resources available. And all our contact information is there and everything is up there as well. So intelligentconversations.com. And of course, our book, The Sales Team You Deserve, is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and, wherever you buy books, it's available there as well.
So I'll pull the rug from underneath your feet and ask you one last question. We're sitting down right now in front of a CEO. If you could give he or she some advice on their sales team right now, what would you say to he or she?
So I think the number one strategy to grow your sales organization is to be strategic in your sales hiring. So raise expectation. If you're serious about growth, elevate the quality of people you're adding to your team, and you should always be recruiting, right? A decision to recruit isn't a decision to hire. A lot of people hire reactively. They think, oh, this guy left, I got to replace them. Well, it's too late. It's already too late. You've missed the opportunity. So if you always have a low-level search going, if you're always looking for talent, every now and then you're going to see someone better than your highest producing salesperson, and you can decide, would I find a way to fund someone who's going to outperform my top producer? Chances are pretty good. Yeah, I'll figure that out. We'll make that happen. So number one would be, elevate your sales hiring game. The second thing I would say, you only asked for one, I'm going to give you two, right? The second thing I would say is inspect the quality of the coaching conversations your sales leaders are having. Right? Yeah. I don't think sales leaders really spend enough time asking the right questions, focusing on developing the people on their team and elevating their skill sets and mindsets. Instead, like we talked about before, it's all about revenue production, what's going to close this week. And it's very reactive, not proactive, and looking mid to long term toward, elevating the entire team. So number one, hiring. Number two, inspect the coaching conversations your sales managers are having.
It's interesting because so often we've been so in our industry driven by this thing called data, make decisions off of data. I almost think sometimes data's come in as an interruption to just good conversations. If you have somebody who's not comfortable selling or asking for money, that's probably not going to be in data somewhere. Maybe the loss of sales, or maybe they're stalled at a certain part of the sales process. But it's interesting, your advice about really having CEOs get engaged in understanding how they're having conversations with their people. And you can do that inside sales as well as outside sales departments.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Mike. Appreciate it. And anybody who has not gotten the book, I've read the book. I've also know Mike's customers. If you are looking for an organization to really give you insight to mindset and skill set of your teams and how to hire the right people, check out Mike's company at intelligentconversations.com. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Coaching Conversations by Tim Hagen and Progress Coaching. Now, our company is always coming out with new and innovative solutions to help leaders coach their employees. And recently, we just created a new service called Coach to You, where leaders can pick and choose topics and assign 7 to 21-day programs for employees to learn and, more importantly, apply actions and then reflect and share what they're going to do going forward as a result of the learning. It's called Coach to You. We're literally bringing coaching to your employees. If you're intrigued, we'll have a link in each one of our episodes where you can get more information. And again, thank you so much for listening to another episode.